Welcome to HorrorBabble. Today we are thrilled to present a HorrorBabble exclusive. There Were Other Versions of Us by Edward Lorn. We hope you enjoy it. I awoke to a light coming through the window. Winter had stripped the leaves from the trees, and I could see this light like a dim sun piercing the forest at the rear of my property. My nearest neighbors are forever away. The only family I have are memories. Everyone else, at my advanced age, has withered away and died. My only companions out here are trees and snow, and the occasional wild animal. As far as I was concerned, there shouldn't have been anything out here with me, especially not in the middle of the night. My land stretches for ages in every direction. Unless the wildlife had started glowing, I figured someone must have been trespassing and in need of an escort in a direction aimed at a friendlier face than mine. I don't live in the middle of nowhere for nothing. I sleep in long johns. All I had to do was step into my boots, and I was decent enough to venture out onto the back porch. The wind bit at my dangling ears and my age-enlarged nose. My balls jumped into my gut. It was cold and crisp and dry this night. The snow on the ground sparkled like diamonds in sunlight, even in the dark. I could smell the pungent odor of pine and earth and the markings of male animals. Once the porch boards stopped creaking under my weight, dead silence welcomed me. On my way through the house, I had lost track of the light, but finding it again was no problem. It was the only thing alien on the familiar landscape that was my property. The light seemed bigger now. You could say that was because I was up and out of bed and moving around, but I don't think so. I'm sure the light had gotten bigger, the way a campfire might flare when a knot explodes or a gust of wind stokes the coals. This was most assuredly not a campfire, mind you. This was stable, no flickering. It never waned. No matter the angle, the light remained strong, like a beacon, like a flashlight. "You come out here where I can see you," I hollered. Out here a voice can carry forever, with nothing to stop it but the end of the world. "I ain't going to do nothing to you. Show yourself before someone gets hurt." I received just the response I was expecting. None. If I were in this stranger's shoes, I might have kept my mouth shut too. The way I saw it, if my silent visitor continued their mute act, I could either ignore them and hope they didn't come after me, or I could go out into the uncaring wilderness after them. The safer answer might have been to stay indoors and defend myself on my own terms, with a home field advantage, but my reasoning was different. I was going after the son of a bitch, because I'm impatient and curious. They could have never shown their faces, and then I'd have been left wondering, possibly forever, who'd been out here. Where's the fun in that? At least going after them was an active decision and not a passive one. I've never been a passive guy. My dick was hard enough to cut diamond by the time I zipped up my fur-lined coat. I was excited beyond belief, and the cold only helped to exhilarate me. It was, truth be told, the most action I'd seen in longer than I care to remember. It had been over 2 decades since I last knew the touch of another human being, and, if I'm honest, I don't miss the experience. I'd rather pleasure myself than have to deal with someone else's satisfaction. With my shotgun laid across my arms, in the crooks of my elbows, I offered whoever was behind the light one final chance to do the right thing, the safest thing. "I got a gun, and I intend to use it on the first thing that moves. You ain't got my permission to be out here and—" The light vanished. After a minute in the dark, I wasn't wholly sure that I was even looking in the proper direction anymore. Great, I thought. Now what am I supposed to do? At least the light had given me a target, a direction to head in, but now I was screwed. Shit. I remained on my back porch, waiting for the light to return, but it never did. Once my teeth started chattering, my shotgun and I headed back inside. Leaving my coat and boots on, just in case the light returned, I crawled back into bed. All night and into the next morning, the shotgun slept by my side. Birds sang me awake. I made coffee and sat in a kitchen chair I'd moved out onto the back porch and gazed off into the distance. Nothing but grey and white trunks with skeletal branches devoid of foliage, yet dusted with snow, as far as my eyes could see. Everything was either dead or asleep, aside from me, of course. I don't know what I was waiting on. Even if the light returned, I wouldn't have been able to see it in the daylight. Still, I stayed, until the cold chased me back inside once again. I made a fire in the stove and ate some deer meat and leftover potatoes I'd fried in fat the night before. After my meal, I sat in front of the stove, warming my hands, and read a Jonathan Franzen novel about a dysfunctional family. Then again, aren't they all? It was nigh on noon before I realized I was still waiting for something, anything to happen. A knock on my door, fingernails clicking on a window pane, footsteps down my hall, anything at all. If I'm honest, I knew I was no longer alone out here. After a while, my mind began conjuring images and putting faces to my irrational fears, tentacle-faced baddies and ethereal spirits with horns and glimmering smiles took up residence in my thoughts. I've never been much for horror literature due to my overactive imagination, preferring drama and comedy to death and mayhem, but the few terrors I'd consumed in my lifetime had been penned by the likes of Poe and Lovecraft. But my favorite ghost story was Dickens's A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead, to begin with, but I digress. I was waiting on something, and I had no idea what that thing might be it human, animal, or otherwise. The only possibility to surface in my reaching mind was lanky and grey, with large black eyes set into a huge teardrop-shaped cranium. Roswell, New Mexico's most famous illegal alien, bounded unbidden into my head. I smiled and chuckled at my imagination. All this imagining was getting me nowhere. Here I was, letting my brain get the best of me, when I could be doing something productive with my day. In my bedroom, I found my compass in the top drawer of my nightstand. I climbed into bed and used the compass to place roughly the spot where I'd seen the light the night prior. The needle came to rest between west-northwest. Again, this was my best estimate. Seeing as how I had nothing better to do, I figured I might as well try and ease my wandering mind. Just after 1 o'clock that afternoon, I left my back porch and journeyed into the woods, following my compass's arrow due west-northwest. I counted 1,200 steps and some change before I came across anything worth mentioning. And it is at this place in my story where I must take a branching path and fill in some much-needed information. When I was young, I married a woman named Melly. Melly was not a nickname. It wasn't short for anything. Her mother had been a lifelong fan of Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, and because Melly's father nor any of her mother's family were around or alive to talk any sense into the woman, Melly it remained. I fell in love quick, for Melly was the female version of me. We loved all the same things, wanted to travel to all the same places, and knew how to touch each other intimately to assure quick and fulfilling climaxes. Making love to her was, if I may be vulgar, like masturbation. We had a fast, unchristian courtship, a whirlwind romance, if you will. At least that's what my parents called it. Religion and nonsense such as that had never dug its lecherous claws into me, so I didn't care what my folks or their church had to say. "Let us be heathens and rejoice," said I. Melly and I eloped in November. We got married in a small courthouse in Saco, Maine, and honeymooned in Brewer. There's this strip hotel called the Cozy Inn, where we spent 3 nights drunk out of our minds on Pabst Blue Ribbon. We made love more than we ate, and only got out of bed to use the restroom, or to allow the owners, or whoever the woman was, to change the sheets. We never saw housekeeping. The lady who checked us in was the same person to clean our room. I did not envy the woman her job. Our bedding must have smelled of a hamster's cage. Then we drove home to Biddeford and commenced making each other miserable, as married couples are wont to do. What is it about a piece of paper that infects a loving relationship? Is it the idea of permanence, the fear of unchanging partners, the feeling of being suddenly trapped, buried alive? To this day, I cannot tell you why we stayed together as long as we did. All I seemed to want out of the relationship was to be left alone, and all Melly seemed to want was companionship. I feel as if I found the person I'm supposed to be with, and here you are refusing to be with me. So it was no wonder she finally started stepping out on me. I don't know why it hurt so much. If I didn't want her, I should have let someone else make her happy. It felt worse than an outside betrayal. It felt internal, as if I had somehow betrayed myself, as if I had no idea who I was anymore. 3 years after our marriage, we moved out into the middle of nowhere, not where I live now, but farther south from here. Orono, Maine, to be exact, within the city limits, but not in the city proper, a place known colloquially as the unincorporated. We were an hour from fast food and chain stores, whereas nowadays I am too far away from civilization to so much as consider a trip into town. Melly hated living out there because there was no one around, but wouldn't you know it, she found someone anyway. To this day, I have no idea who the guy might have been. I'm getting ahead of myself. At some point, Melly started going for walks every day. She'd be gone for 2, sometimes 3 hours. I didn't think much of it until one day she came home with a leaf stuck in her hair, as if she'd been rolling around on the forest floor. Just a single dead leaf, crispy and brown. I got close enough to pull it out, and that's when I caught a whiff of a not altogether unpleasant odor. Think wet potato skins and blood. It was her woman smell, a musk. Unique to her alone. You live long enough with a female, even if you're no longer having sex with her, and you come to know their odor. They put off a certain scent when they're aroused or have been recently bedded, as I would assume we men do as well. Suffice it to say, I could smell her sex. The next time she went out, I followed her. She walked for a long time. The sun went down and the nocturnal animals started to wake and sound their mating calls. This was mid-September, and while the woods were cool in that part of the state, I didn't need a heavy jacket to keep me warm. I would guess an hour had passed before I lost her. I was seconds away from turning back when I heard them talking. Pinpointing voices in the dark, in the woods, is near impossible, but somehow I found them. Well, I should say I stumbled across Melly. As I've said before, I never found out who her new lover was. I suppose that this night their chat had ended and one or the other, or perhaps neither, felt like rutting around on the forest floor. Or perhaps they'd heard me coming and cancelled their plans. When she appeared between 2 trees, she was heading right for me. Having no idea I'd be out after dark, I didn't have a flashlight on me, but I could see her well enough, even in the dark. Maybe it was a full moon and its light helped me to see it. I can't be sure, for it feels forever ago. When she saw me, she screamed and turned and bolted to her death. A broken tree branch, jutting from a sturdy oak, stabbed through her eye and jammed into her brain. She dangled from the branch, twitching in the dark and making this god-awful sound, a kind of na-na-na, as if she was trying to say no, but couldn't quite complete it. I suppose maybe that was exactly what she was trying to say. The first thing that crossed my mind when I realized she was dead was, "Serves you right, you cheating bitch. You can call me a horrible person if you like. Doesn't make any difference to me. We're never going to meet each other. Think what you will. I am who I am, and I thought what I thought. Back then I couldn't see how her death might have been any fault of mine. But now I can admit that if I hadn't been so untrustworthy, she might still be alive to this day. Nowadays, I fully admit that I had something to do with her death, but I refuse to take all of the blame. She was stepping out on me, and had she not done that, I never would have seen a need to go after her that night. Then again, had I been paying attention to her needs, she might not have... Anyway, it was both our faults. Not like my admission here matters. She's just as dead, one way or another. After I had tugged her off the branch and saw that there was nothing that could be done to save her, I trekked back to our house, slept through the night, and then grabbed a pick and shovel for my return. With daylight on my side, I found her undisturbed and just as dead as I'd left her. I dug a shallow grave, maybe 3 feet deep, rolled her inside, filled in the hole, and left the shovel sticking up from the top of the grave as a makeshift tombstone. I used my pocket knife to carve her initials into the handle of the shovel, along with the date. Needless to say, when I came across her grave out here, ages away from where she died, I was more than a little taken aback. The shovel I'd used as a grave marker showed no age, and neither did the ground I buried her in. I might as well have dug that bastard yesterday for all the settling the dirt had done. Somebody had my number. The someone had discovered what I'd done all that time ago and had tracked me down. It was likely Mellie's old lover was looking for revenge. I couldn't count him out anyway. Imagine the soul rot created by decades of heartache and the festering need for vengeance. Well, I wasn't going to stand around and give the son of a bitch the satisfaction. Not if I could get back to the house and grab my shotgun, that is. Why hadn't I brought it with me? I don't know. Have you ever locked your keys in your car when you're in a hurry? Had my will to live that afternoon not been so strong, I might have had a stroke. I pushed the old ticker hard as I half jogged, half ran back to the house. I suspected that at any moment my chest would explode in a fountain of gore, and I'd collapse to my knees as, far off, the soft laughter of a sniper accompanied my passing. He'd roll me over in my last second so he could look me in the eyes. He'd want to watch me leave this world. A little melodramatic, sure, but it's what I would have done in his shoes. I was clopping up the rear steps and up to the porch when something occurred to me. My enemy might be just inside the door, seated at the kitchen table, my shotgun at the ready, waiting for me to burst in and catch a load of long-sought revenge to the gut. I slowed considerably as I mounted the final 2 steps. The back door was closed, as was the screen, and I couldn't recall if I was the one who'd closed them. Damning my forgetful mind, I pulled open the screen. The metallic hinges screeched. I stepped aside as I opened the screen door and pressed myself against the outer wall in case the person inside, if there was anyone inside, had heard the screen door protest and decided to blast away at the wooden door that now separated us. I waited for the concussive burst of a shotgun. When none came, I reached to the side and twisted the knob on the inner door and shoved it inward while I remained with my back to the outer wall. No gunshot welcomed me. Yet, when I finally peered inside, I saw that I wasn't alone either. Sitting at the kitchen table, Mellie smiled and waved hello. Her hair was golden brown, her eyes a pale green. It was the same face I'd fallen in love with ages ago, back when we were both younger and as innocent as we would ever be. Hi. She spoke as if it had been hours since we last saw each other, instead of decades. Hi, I said. What the hell else was I supposed to say? I guess what the fuck are you doing here was in order, but it wasn't on my tongue to say. You look old. I laughed exactly once, more an expulsion of breath than a real laugh, though, like a dog coughing. Yeah, I suppose I should, seeing as it's been forever since you last saw me. You look well, though. Healthy. That's nice. Look, I'm all for this catching up and finding out how you've been passing the time and all that, but would you mind telling me, first and foremost, how the Christ you're sitting here? She didn't hesitate a second. Let me ask you this first. When was the last time you saw me? 1965, thereabouts. And what was I doing? You weren't doing much. You were dead. She clapped her hand over her mouth, I assumed to stifle a gasp. The look of shock in her eyes startled me. Looking at her, you'd think she didn't know she was dead, or that she was supposed to be dead, or whatever. Moving on. I died? She finally managed. I'm dead? Well, I'd say that cleared up whether or not she knew, didn't it? Yeah, ages ago. So again, would you mind telling me what you're doing here? How'd I die? Why was I getting the impression she was stalling? Anyway, this was going to be tricky. Should I come right out and tell her she died while trying to escape from me? Or should I lie and hope that she, whatever she was at this point, be it spectre or hallucination, never found out the truth? I said, "What's the last thing you remember?" That was clever of me, if I do say so myself. I babbled with pride as only a man can in such a situation. She looked at me as if she was now considering whether or not I was stalling. She said, "I was in the woods with you, and then, I don't know, I guess I just got lost. Been wandering around since last night. In the dark, I might add." She picked a flashlight out of her lap and laid it on the table. "This died on me shortly after I lost track of you." 2 things were immediately clear. 1, I now knew where the light I'd seen last night had come from. And 2, I was in no immediate danger of her gunning for revenge, unless all this was an elaborate ruse to get me to drop my guard. If that was the case, I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I guess you want to know why I'm not surprised at how old you are. I almost said, actually, the thought never crossed my mind, because it hadn't. But what I said was, that was going to be my next question, yeah. She smiled. Liar. Guilty. Now, tell me how it is you're sitting here, looking just as fresh as you did last time I saw you. First, you tell me how I died. No use giving you all this info if you're the one who killed me. I hoped my cringe wasn't obvious. If it was, she didn't mention it. Her expression didn't so much as shift a centimeter. If she did notice, she likely wrote it off as me flinching at the thought of her being dead, like any loving husband might, no matter how many years lay between him and the deceased. I found you in the woods. Not a lie. Your eye was impaled on a tree branch. Again, not a lie. Jesus! She visibly cringed, as I had feared I'd cringed moments ago. And you didn't do it? Nope. Third time, no lie, sung to the rhythm of No Woman, No Cry. Any idea who did? Nope. I repeated. What did the cops say? Nothing of interest was ever found out. Technically, I still hadn't lied. I was beyond proud of myself. She loosed a deep sigh. I'll give you one thing. Other than your slip-up earlier, you've always been honest with me. Probably because you're a terrible liar. I can appreciate that. So, I guess it's my turn to be honest with you. I have zero idea what happened last night. First, we were out in the woods, together. Then I was in the dark. Took me a minute to remember I was holding a flashlight. When it came to me, I clicked it on and headed toward what I thought was home. Nothing looked familiar. And then, like I said before, my flashlight died. This morning, I came across this house in the woods. Back door was wide open, so I poked my head in. I found some old man asleep in a bed. Me? Yes, you. Could it have been anyone else? I mean, this is your house, right? Good point. Go on. I saw you were sleeping with a rifle. I didn't correct her because it didn't matter that my shotgun wasn't a rifle. I was more interested in the fact that she'd managed to sneak into my house and watch me while I slept. And I backed my ass out of here. Then something happened. I can't really explain what. Time. Skipped is the simplest way to put it. First thing I noticed was that the sun was above me instead of on the horizon, so it was later in the day. She said this last part like a question. I didn't interrupt, as I assumed it was rhetorical. She continued. I was in the woods again. I thought I was lost. But when I turned around, I saw the house and the old man I'd seen last night, or whenever it was, walking out of it. I didn't know it was you, and the guy I saw didn't have a gun, so I thought, instead of confronting him later and possibly getting my head blown off, I would secure the gun I'd seen him, you, sleeping with. Then I could approach him safely. Again, I didn't recognize you, and if anyone knows how jumpy people get when living alone in the middle of nowhere, it's me. Were you so scared all the time, back then? She didn't have time to answer. I could see the truth in her eyes. I wasn't enough to make you feel secure? Again, no words. But the truth was obvious. She dropped her head, as if that would keep me from seeing through her. That hurt. After all this time and everything we'd been through and my hand in her death, what hurt the most above all else was the fact that she hadn't felt safe around me. Perhaps, I thought, because of me. After a moment, she lifted her head, the corners of her eyes damp, and said, Anyway, so I snuck in after the old man disappeared into the woods. I pointed to a picture frame on the table. In the frame was one of the only pictures we'd taken together, our wedding day. Me in a button-down chambray shirt, and her in a modest blue gingham dress. We looked happy. We looked like we loved each other. At that moment in our lives, perhaps we did. That's when you saw that picture, I suppose, when you came inside to secure the gun? Yeah. She swallowed. Her throat clicked. She asked for a glass of water, and I ran her some from the tap into a clean glass. She drank the whole thing in 3 big swallows. I guess time travel makes you thirsty. She laid the glass down and picked up the frame. Looking into the glass, she said, I was pretty confused, seeing as how the last time I saw you, it was 1968, and the license I found in your dresser said you got it in 2012. That was years ago. 1968 or 2012? Both. Shit, she said. Just shit. What were you doing in my drawers? She broke away from the empty glass and met my eyes. "Last time I checked, they were our drawers. But this isn't our house. I had no idea until just now, when you came in and I looked into your eyes, that the old man I saw in bed last night and walking into the woods this morning was you. How could I have known?" "So you decided to go through a stranger's drawers?" "What? Yes, of course. How else? Wait, why am I on trial all of a sudden? What did I do wrong? I was lost and confused, and I needed answers." "You died. A long time ago at that. So pardon me if I'm a little suspicious." She relaxed a bit and nodded. "Hell, I bet you can't even be sure I'm me. How could you be, seeing as it's been so goddamn long?" "Oh, yes, I can. I'm plenty sure." "How can you be so certain?" "Because, in all this time, your face hasn't left my mind. Like you, it feels like yesterday." From the look on her face, she took what I said as sentimental rubbish, when, in fact, it was more like guilt. The reality of Melly sitting at my kitchen table and the emotions circling me concerning her as a past love buzzed inside my head, conflicting feelings swarming like angry wasps. Whether she be imagined or on vacation from some kind of afterlife, I still had to corral how I felt about her. I had forgiven her long ago for her infidelity. Anger would have eaten me alive had I not come to grips with those feelings. After all, she was dead and wasn't coming back. At least that's what usually happens when someone dies. 10 times out of 10, they stay dead. "Do you think this is heaven?" she asked. "That would mean I'm dead too, wouldn't it? I mean, I don't feel dead." I recalled my stressed ticker on the way back to the house and thought maybe my having died a possibility. But then I remembered that this crazy situation had started well before I'd exerted myself. She nodded. "Neither do I. If anything, I feel, I don't know, hungover? Maybe, but that's not quite right. Mostly I feel stuffy and achy, like I slept in the wrong position for far too long." "Like decades?" I asked with a crooked smile. "Yeah," she returned my smile. "Something like that. Do I look the same to you, my clothes and all?" "No, your clothes are different." "Oh." I stepped into the kitchen and farther into the light. Melly's eyes changed from indifferent to confused to worried. She stared at me. Finally, she said, "Where's your scar?" "What scar?" "Your cleft palate correction. It went across here." She traced her finger from left nostril to the arch of her lip. "You had a cleft palate when you were born. Your mother had it fixed. You had a scar." My hand went unconsciously to my upper lip. My fingertips brushed my Cupid's bow. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did," she said, forcibly emphasizing the periods in her statements. "Melly, I think I'd know." "Who's Melly?" "Had you poured water down my back, it would have been ice before it hit the floor." "You're Melly, Melly." "You're scaring me, Paul." "Who the hell is Paul?" "You are." Melly, or whoever Melly thought she was, stood quickly enough that the kitchen chair she'd been sitting in toppled and crashed to the floor with a wooden clatter. She had the chance to say, "What's going on?" before she vanished. I've seen a lot of disappearing acts in my day, on film and on television, and even where my father was concerned, but none of them held a candle to Melly's. One second she was there, 5 feet away from me, and the next she was gone. No puff of smoke, no wavering image, no flickering. Just there and then not there. The instant she vanished, my ears popped, as if I dropped several 100 feet in seconds. My head pounded relentlessly. But even through the pain, I recalled what Melly had said about feeling hungover, how she'd felt as if she'd been asleep for years. I clamped my head between my palms in an attempt to hold my skull together. I stumbled, crashed into the wood stove, and doubled over under the pain. The different sides of my brain ground together, or perhaps it was the sound of my teeth grinding as they attempted to rub against one another until they were as smooth as river stones. Again, my ears popped. Then, as Melly had vanished, so did the pounding in my head. The pain was gone so suddenly that I might have thought Melly and the agony that followed her cessation of existence had been nothing but the product of my imagination. I righted my posture and glanced around, wide-eyed, blinking, shaken. The hair on my forearms stood, as if someone had rubbed a balloon against them, drawing them ever upward with the pull of static electricity. An erection pounded at my crotch. "Help!" Mellie's voice came from outside. I continued to think of her that way, as Mellie, long after I found out she wasn't Mellie. Assumingly beckoned, I rushed out onto the back porch. The sun had set, but the horizon through the trees remained orange, going on purple. I found Mellie easily enough at the edge of what I consider my backyard, where the tree line begins. She was a mess, caked head to foot in reddish-brown mud, hair like a tumbleweed. A single, crispy brown leaf stuck in her hair. I locked onto that leaf, and my heart redlined. What the hell? The words fell out of me. You were so mad," she stammered as she slid away on her hands and rump. I reached for her, and she scrambled away. I stopped where I was, didn't move an inch farther. Total recall coming over me, seeing her spin and run, hearing the mumbled na-na-na as her impaled brain tried to deny something that might have been me or death or both of us. I shook my head to clear the image. I tried to think, to process what was going on. The smell of wet potatoes and fresh blood permeated the wood. I couldn't decipher whether the odor was real or memory or completely fabricated by my imagination to fit the scene. Nothing made sense. Only parts were correct. The wet potatoes, the stench of blood like raw oysters, the single crispy brown leaf. But she hadn't been covered in mud, and I hadn't had a chance to... What had she said just now? You were so mad. Yards away from me now, she screamed, "You get the fuck away from me!" She climbed to her feet in a stumbling lurch and staggered into the ever-darkening wood. I let her go. There was nothing I could do for her. I was the enemy. To give chase would only further cement that thought in her mind. Had you seen the utter terror, the basest, truest fear I'd seen in her eyes, you would understand. Words uttered in that same, albeit lessened state of fear, surfaced in the pool of my mind. Who's Mellie? I've never been what I considered a dumb man. I have my faults, but I'm educated, as most readers claim to be. So I came to the most obvious, if implausible, conclusion. There were other versions of us, Mellie and I. And this version of Mellie, whoever she might have been, seemed to have a very good reason for fearing me. Something bothered me, though, niggled me through and through. What about the grave in the woods, the one that wasn't supposed to be out here, so far away from where she died? Now that was a good question. I grabbed a shovel from alongside the house and carried it with me into the woods. I used the compass once more to retrace my steps. I found Mellie's plot just before the final light of day left me. During my trek to the grave, I'd heard Mellie crashing around distantly, out in the trees, but silence was my only companion as I began to dig. I said a quick word of prayer. Not that I thought anyone was listening, heavenward or earthbound, but the prayer did bolster my courage. I stabbed lazily at the fresh grave, procrastinating, before I drummed up enough courage to start digging in earnest. I couldn't remember how deeply I dug the first time, so hitting the body startled me. The corpse had far less give to it than the dirt in which I'd buried it. Jabbing it with the shovel felt like going at a rare steak with a teaspoon. I instantly realized something was amiss. What that might have been eluded me, until I uncovered the corpse's face. It was me. I was buried in the woods, about a quarter mile from where I'd lived for... How many years had I lived out here? 20? 12? 7 years? 70? Jesus! Each one of those numbers felt impossibly accurate, and it occurred to me that seeing my own dead eyes, glassy and vacant, staring up at me from this shallow grave, might have driven me past the point of no return and over the edge of madness. All of a sudden, I couldn't be sure of my age or my own name. "What the hell is going on?" I asked of the tree surrounding me. I took a single step backward, and my foot landed on something unstable. I sat down hard on snow, as if someone had, at the last moment, snatched away a chair I'd been aiming for. "Dale? Dale, that you?" I knew Mellie's voice. Even if I hadn't heard it less than an hour before, I would have known it anywhere. I glanced around until I saw her, about 50 yards away, half hidden by a tree. She peeked from around the trunk. Mellie? I questioned everything at this point, especially my sanity. I'm Beth, Elizabeth, and we're not alone. Who was I then? And where was I? Who else is out here, Mellie? I asked in a trembling voice. Shh, it'll hear you. Her words sent frozen spiders scurrying up my back and into my hair. Who? I stage whispered. Not a who. What? You're fucking scaring me. Shh. Her voice trailed away as she slid behind the tree and out of sight. I watched the trunk, waiting for her to pop out of the other side like a shitty magician, but she never reappeared. As far as I know, I never saw the Beth version of Mellie ever again. I scanned the forest floor and decided here was not the place to be, wherever here was. I heard and felt a voice. This voice was not pleasant. It brought to mind every horror film I'd seen and every scary book I'd read. The voice shambled into my mind, a hungry undead seeking nourishment only my brain could offer. This voice, this abomination of sound, this offense to every rational mind's demands of impossibility, said, "You're not welcome here." Can a voice alone drive a man to ruin? In the final moment of my sanity, I saw the thing as it allowed me to see it. This monstrous thing pulled apart the tops of the trees like someone shoving aside curtains in order to see out of a window. With the trees parted, the entity gazed down on me, quizzically, head cocked to one side. The massive creature's skin had the color and gloss of freshly spilled blood. Black oozed from yellow eyes like running mascara. The torso, while the size of a grain silo, was thin in comparison to the bulbous head. Pale ribs bulged like half-excavated bones from the crimson flesh and flexed as the thing breathed. The lower half of the torso was hidden from view by the horizon, by the very curve of the earth. Its teeth, oddly white and human-like, gleamed brightly in black gums. "You're not welcome here," it repeated. Hot breath enveloped me, smelled like the breeze off a swampy landfill. The snow melted where the breath touched. "Why are you here?" it asked. I stammered, but could not complete my sentence. The impossibly large creature lowered its giant head to peer at me. To its perception, I must have been the size of a fly on a wall. Its fetid breath washed over me. "What brings you to the Withered, you of many names?" I couldn't speak, so I thought instead. "The Withered?" "The Withered, yes," it agreed, seemingly reading my mind. "Where is that?" "Where need not concern you." Another language that seemed complete gibberish fell from the entity's mouth, something that sounded vaguely Norwegian? No, it was far more alien than any dialect I'd heard. In truth, the garbled speech sounded as if someone had run together several languages, or perhaps overlapped every language at once. "You've traveled, but not alone." The monstrosity looked, if I had my bearings correct, to the east. Absent-mindedly, my head swung in that direction. Although the creature no longer looked in my direction, it continued to speak to me. "This is where memory is formed and maintained. You're not the first to slip in, but the Withered is not meant for your kind. Something has gone wrong. You must have been invited. The Creator's doing? The bastard?" "Perhaps the Creator, yes," came another voice altogether, this one sounding both male and female, and undeniably more welcoming than the creature above me. The new voice continued, "I do not think it is the bastard's doing, though. This feels smaller. It feels muddled, as if the source is human." The creature above the trees chuckled. My skeleton quaked under my flesh. With a tremendous spang, my vision blacked. Suddenly weak and no longer in control of my motor functions, I leaned forward and collapsed into the grave I dug, the one that moments ago my own body had occupied. Only now, the grave was empty. where I had moments before seen myself laid to rest in the dirt, is where I now resided. There is an odd sense of satisfaction seeing things come full circle, even if that eventuality means your doom. Because I was not yet dead, and not yet laid on my back. I knew this thread, this timeline, this branching path, was not finished with me. After all, I'd seen how I'd been buried, face up, not on my back. I waited to be rolled over, and I would go on waiting. The first shovelful hit the back of my head. The cold dirt felt like water, which, to my perception, was strange beyond words. If I hadn't heard the gravel scraping the shovel as the load left the spade, I might have gone on thinking it was water. A sad, sobbing voice spluttered, "You weren't supposed to follow me." Melly? I want to tell you that I said her name, but I don't believe I was capable of speech, what with my face shoved down into the loose earth of my grave. But it was at that moment that I asked myself likely the same question you're asking yourself right now. Why don't I just roll over? In my place, you'd likely have rolled over and kept Melly or whoever from burying you alive. My reasoning was this. As long as I stayed on my belly, face in the dirt, I would never come along and dig myself up. I would never find myself face up in a shallow grave. To roll over, in my mind, seemed to be to force my death into reality. Of course, there were several problems with that logic, but I was being buried alive after setting eyes on what I can only describe as the godlike entity of some interdimensional wood in the afterlife, or the withered, or whatever this place was, so excuse me if my thought processes were a bit jumbled. Hell, maybe I was already dead and this was damnation, being perpetually buried alive by the person whose death and interment I'd played a part in. The first problem with my logic was that there was no guarantee or even evidence that this was the same timeline as the one in which I'd been buried face up. This could have been an entirely different thread on the loom of creation, another branching path along this impromptu cosmic journey I was on. The issue with that thinking was that if I was being buried alive, face down, in this version of reality, I would soon be dead. But if I rolled over, I might have completed the final step for the other timeline, sealing my fate. "Why couldn't you stay away?" Melly or Beth or whoever said in a voice clogged with emotion. Without rolling over, I twisted my neck, effectively freeing my mouth so I could say, "What happened?" I could have asked anything, but those were the words that came out. "Shh, it'll all be over soon." I don't know that I heard or felt anything after she said that, but if pressed to answer the question of what happened next, I'd say that she hit me once more with the shovel, my shovel, and finished filling in my grave. What are you expecting next? That I woke up buried alive? That I clawed out of the earth like an extra in a zombie film? Perhaps you're in possession of an exceptional imagination and have concocted a scenario where this entire manuscript was written by a revenant with a knack for the written word. Let's be realistic in a very unrealistic situation, shall we? None of that happened. I was buried alive. I died. At least, that version of me did. There is a part of all of us that feels, at times, as if we've been here before, as if we have done the thing we are doing right now at some other time in our lives. That feeling is commonly referred to as déjà vu, and any time we experience it, another branch grows. Sometimes the branch extends from a pre-existing branch, just like any other tree. This occurs when the main trunk has grown tall and sturdy and can easily support new life. But less often, a new branch will grow from the trunk. These branches break and fall and become separated from the main trunk. And while these branches wither and die, the trunk remains, outliving them all. Although I am the narrator of this tale, the story is not about me. Meaning, in storytelling terms, I am not the main character. This is a story about someone who was allowed to switch, or perhaps rebelliously switched between threads. Or, instead of threads, how about strings? Yes, we'll go with strings. Imagine a guitar player strumming along to a tune. Now imagine that same guitar player picking with their fingers, selecting each individual string and letting it ring out without accompaniment. Most of us strum, because finger picking is much more difficult than strumming. Some might say it is subjectively impossible. But let's say that the trunk version of Melly can fingerpick. She can slap and play percussive guitar and use a bow and every other style known to man, and even some styles yet to be discovered. While I was stuck, confused, idly strumming away on my timeline, Melly, or another version of her, was picking her way through all of her timelines. And I theorized that some version of her came across me, burying the Melly version of her in the woods so many years ago, and had finally caught up with me to repay the favor. I believe almost every version of Melly can fingerpick. This is why the Melly in my kitchen was unaware of everything that was going on. She'd simply stumbled upon her talent and ended up picking my string, this string I've only been able to strum. Now, I want you to imagine infinite versions of someone bounding around in space and time. They would come across alternative versions of themselves, varying colors of hair and eyes, missing or false teeth, new scars, or the lack of pre-existing ones. Eventually, that person might find a reality in which they never existed at all, or perhaps a reality that contained two or more, albeit drastically different versions of themselves. Would those two versions be drawn to each other? Furthermore, might they one day stumble on a version of themselves born a different gender? This version of them might know everything that the other versions know, and that version might be the one version that is unable to fingerpick. He might not be musically inclined whatsoever. Hypothetically speaking, this version might even be a writer. And thanks as always for listening today, ladies and gentlemen. We do hope you enjoyed this HorrorBabble exclusive. For more information on the author, do visit the video description below. And until next time,